Wonderful to be with you all. Thank you for joining. We are going to be talking a little bit more on the ethical and maybe responsible side of generative AI, an area that I'm very passionate about based on the journey I've taken in my career in AI, now leading to generative AI, but really it's amplified a lot of the things that I worry about or that I think about and talk about every day. So thank you so much first to the group. I actually am looping this right into my International Women's, month. So you can see I mentioned that here. I have about 16 events this month, and I am talking about this same thing to, I think by the end of the month, it'll be over 10,000 people. So you are one of the first to hear this message, but certainly it is an amazing, to your point earlier, Amir, like so many of my clients, so many of my friends on LinkedIn, so great to see you all, have identified this as an area of interest, number one, just from an educational perspective. So I'm going to give you the same, so slightly varied, but the same session that I give to my clients. So that I was telling someone earlier, I'm like, well, it was a secret that we were doing for our clients that I'm going to share with this community. But I think I hope that you'll understand and appreciate kind of the perspectives that I share with you today. I do want to invite you to connect with me. Obviously, you might win a chance to talk. Who knows? Maybe I'm on the list of people you get to talk to. But I'm also very interested in just being connected with you directly. So feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. It's the best way. I answer probably my LinkedIn inbox better than I answer my own email. So it's the best way to get a hold of me. Awesome. So let's go ahead and there we go. I'm going to go ahead and kind of get into it. The first thing I always like to do is talk about why I do what I do. This is my family, my gaggle of humans that I am responsible for, that I take care of. But the reason I mention it, one, is my firstborn son. He actually turned 18. I don't know if I want to lead with that, but he turned 18 yesterday. His name is Max. He's there in the pool. He has Down syndrome. And he was my firstborn. So having a child with special needs right out of the gate as a mom was pretty intense. But I'm a technologist, and I've always been a technologist. And as a result, it instantly helped me see the world through a different perspective. And so in this case, I now, accessibility is now a lens upon which I see through, that I can offer to the teams that I'm on, and certainly to the teams that I lead. My dad also, he is another reason that I do what I do. You could see him right next to there. We were in our Christmas PJs. And yeah, we're one of those families that buys all matching PJs at Christmas. But one of the benefits of kind of our big multi-generational family, my dad came to live with us, but he came after suffering an accident. He was a pedestrian walking across the road he actually is a Marine and was running 11 miles a day, walked across the road, distracted driver, hit him in the crosswalk and, basically aged him 20 years overnight, broke a bunch of bones. He was in critical, ICU for 6 months. It was crazy. But when he came out of that, I realized he was in his 60s at the time. He had a lot of years to live. But now in this slightly different world, he had a cognitive brain injury. He couldn't work with technology in the way that he could before. He can't use a computer. He can't really even use a smartphone. He can't use a smartwatch, like all these mechanisms that I would have used to make his life better. So voice technology, generative capabilities to help him communicate to people. You'll see this kind of permeated through what we're talking about. So I just always like to say, my lens is a little different based on what I've gone through. But my career, if you go and find out on LinkedIn, I've sought out companies to work for that are very specifically interested in responsible use of technology in various different ways, whether they're focusing on increasing accessibility, whether they're focusing on increasing or reducing bias and increasing mitigation practices for bias, making sure that there's a level of fairness or justness. I was very deliberate in the companies that I chose to work on based on my own home experience. Now, this is just a whirlwind tour through some of the cool things that have happened to me in my career so far. I was employee 10 on Amazon Alexa. So on the product team for skills, I built over 100 skills or apps for Alexa. One of them is mindfulness. So if you ever call the mindfulness skill, that is mine. I also did a whole bunch of work in kindness and random acts of kindness, Christmas kindness, couples kindness, corporate kindness. You get the idea of the kind of things that I like to build. But I will tell you, one of the very first things that I was told when I was building those from my team, and none of them looked like me or sounded like me, but they all were very, it was very interesting. They would say, like, who needs mindfulness in the kitchen? Because at the beginning of Alexa, that's what we thought. It was a kitchen device. Who needs mindfulness in the kitchen? Why are you building kindness skills? Like, that's not even on our list of Jeff Bezos's favorite projects. And I was like, as a mom, my perception is different. As a caregiver, my perception is different. I, as a result, now have over 2 million unique users of these skills. Now, for some of you, maybe that's not a big number, but for me, who side hustled building these skills on Saturday afternoon, like, I was like, look, this is a thing. People care about this. And it was the first time I started to see the importance of building an inclusive team. Now, this is, it doesn't seem technically focused, but you'll see the reason I mentioned this. I think it's a really important story. So I'm going to share it with you. It's a no-no. I don't like to read to people my slides, but this is one exception I'm going to make for you. So read this along with me, and then I'll tell you the story about why it's so impactful. What is success? So it's a poem / quote that was generated. What is success? To laugh often and much, to win the respect of intelligent people and the affection of children, to earn the appreciation of honest critics and endure the betrayal of false friends, to appreciate the beauty, find the best in others, to leave the world a bit better, whether by a healthy child or a garden patch or a redeemed social condition. To know even one life has breathed easier because you have lived, this is to have succeeded. Beautiful quote, right? What is success? None of that says money. None of that says stature, right? Like, I love it. Well, the world has identified Ralph Waldo Emerson as the author of this quote. And I got off stage one day, and a man came up to me and was like, you should research that. And I'm coachable. Like, I could go research. So I went and researched it and found out it was not written by Ralph Waldo Emerson, that the original author was lost in the world. And her name is Bessie Anderson Stanley. And the funny thing that happened was, as soon as I realized Bessie was the one who wrote this, I reread the quote of the poem, and I saw Bessie in it more than I saw Mr. Emerson. Like, I was like, oh, it makes sense. Affection of children is in the first line. I don't know, maybe Ralph likes children. But then, like, appreciating beauty and garden patches and, like, all of these things, it made sense. But here's why I share this with you. And here's why it's critical as we start a conversation about generative AI and ethics and responsibility, is that the lineage of who wrote this was lost, right? Bessie became lost in the history. And as we tell our stories in the data world, right, as we build our Power BIs, as we create generative AI, it is our responsibility to preserve the lineage of those who gave us the data. It doesn't have to happen. We can definitely lose that, especially in a generative world, right, where we're building new stuff based on old stuff. But how do we take responsibility for the old stuff? How do we give the Bessie Anderson Stanleys of the world their due? I technically like the world of blockchain, right? Blockchain would preserve this if we had figured that out as a world. We're still working on that. But how do we do that? That's part of our responsibility as technologists to think about. And you'll see this repeated, this kind of sense of responsibility repeated as we go through the conversation. Of course, now we have more power than ever at our fingertips. We have more things than we can do. And maybe some of you, thanks, Miriam, for putting that in the chat. I see my LinkedIn, so great. I want you all, if you know the end of this quote, we have more power at our fingertips than any generation that has come before us. But with great power, anyone, comes, I know you must know this, some of you, let's see how many of you are like in the same world that I am in. Right? Yes.
Money.
That's right. That's right. Thanks, Laura, Alice. Thank you so much. Yes. With great power comes great responsibility. Uncle Ben or Voltaire, depending on who you read and follow. But an important practice, right? Because we are now going to be able to do things and not really have the responsible of knowing how it was done. This is the world of generative AI. I can click a button and have magic happen. I can call an API and have magic happen. And I don't really have to take responsibility for how that happened, whose data it was. Is it secure? Is it copyrighted? Is it not? The lineage of that data, the bias that that data might emit. Like, I technically could just go on my merry way. But I will tell you, I'm hoping by the end of this talk, we feel a little bit more inclined to take care of the Bessies. I should write, like, it should be a shirt that I have. Like, hey, no, take care of the Bessies. But give these now new world of applied and generative AI, we can use this to change every experience we've created, right? We've spent a long time, the last 7 years, building conversational agents, chatbots, even creating internal bots, right? We call them intelligent assistants across our enterprises. But now we need to go back and rethink that, because we don't have to do, some of you might know this. I don't know how many of you are in the NLU space. If you're in NLU or natural language today, go ahead and throw a 1 in the chat so I can see you and recognize you. But NLU is hard. It's like solving a difficult problem, which is modeling human language. And in modeling human language, right? Are there no NLU specialists in the house? You should, I mean, of course, we are a quiet breed. I'm not, but in general, NLU people are typically the ones not to raise their hand. But if you are here, I would love to know that, because it's hard. It's a hard problem to solve. We would go in and we'd say, what would a human say? And then we would identify, we call it intent mapping. We would map it over, right, to a function, a piece of code that we'd want it to call. So you say something, code works. However, especially at Alexa, we created in a command control capability, right? Oh, awesome. Great to see you all. So we have this capability now where we start with, what does the user say? And then we map out all the things they might say and direct it towards code we want it to call. It's a very kind of just a lot of work involved in doing that. All of a sudden with generative AI, that part, not a whole lot, but that part of the equation gets removed. Now, I've learned a lot working at, I think I mentioned, of course, I started at Amazon Alexa. I then went on to Microsoft and supported the team that productized cognitive services. So I was in the organization, that research organization, where we were like, oh, look at all these cool projects. And then we wanted to move them into Azure. So I got to see little models become big models at scale. We started with 100 inferences a month. We are now at 5, right? 4 to 5 billion inferences a month. There are things you need to know to do in the beginning so that you can hit a 5 billion inference model at the end. I hope you would agree, right? Like there's a special way you need to do things in order for your model to scale. And so that's some of the things I want to talk to you about today. There's 4 principles that I've learned over the last few years directly related now to the work I do in generative AI. And then we're going to take a whirlwind tour through the capabilities of the generative AI world that we're now in. So one is inclusive engineering. This is 2-pronged. One, of course, make sure your team is inclusive. I don't just mean of gender, but yes, do that. And I don't just mean ethnically, but yes, do that. I actually mean more neurodiversity, right? Find people that are the fast thinkers, but also find those that require time to process. Find people that have families and don't, that went to Ivy League colleges and don't. Like we want people who went to community college, Ivy League college, have dogs, have cats. They're all different people, right? They all have different perspectives on the world. But even me, like I didn't go to school. I was no, I shouldn't say that. I went to school. I didn't stay long enough to get the paper. I never graduated high school. I went right to university. I never graduated university because it was Y2K and I could get a job at IBM. So I just went to IBM. I didn't really value the paper. That's just me. But I'm an important perspective, right? I represent a part of the world that just thinks in a different way. And so having these unique perspectives is critical to building good generative AI and AI solutions in general. The other thing, though, is inclusive data. That's why I kind of made this not just inclusive team building or inclusive organizations, but actually inclusive engineering. You need the right people, but then you also need those right people to be thinking about data collection in a new way. It's probably the biggest lessons we learned at Alexa and Microsoft is trying to make sure we collected data that represented our end user. Here's the funny thing about these models. You're going to start with one end user in mind, Alexa, person in the kitchen, affluent person in the kitchen. And then within a year, maybe 2, you're going to now see that user is now 200 personas. Right? People started buying Alexa. We had no idea. We were like, they were men, they were women, they were affluent, they weren't, they were kids who wanted it. There were students who wanted it. We didn't plan for any of that. So always remember when you're building these generative solutions to think big, because you want to set your intention to try and capture as much of what you will be building for as possible. Another principle is around multimodal. This takes on a new frame inside of generative AI, but now we can build in a way that serves more things at once. And so I think of this in two ways. One, we want to build a multimodal strategy from an accessibility perspective, right? Create opportunities for anyone to connect with you. Meaning, as a client, I want to have a web app, a mobile app, an Alexa skill, a Google Assistant. I also want to be able to connect in someone's car on CarPlay. I want to be able to connect on Siri. It needs to be contextual, but most importantly, it needs to be consistent. When my client comes to me in their kitchen and then continues with me in their car, I want to make sure I remember what they said, remember the problems they have, answer their questions. I'm contextually accurate, right? And GPT empowers this kind of multimodal strategy. On the technology side, multimodal gives us the ability to have one model. That's right. Build one model that can do lots of things, right? You no longer have to necessarily build one for one, which was maybe machine learning a year ago. Now you can build a multimodal strategy, which means you build one GPT model. And now inside that model, you can do sentiment analysis, content tagging, PII redaction. Like there's a whole host of capabilities inside a single model that you can now take advantage of. So you want to know that it's our responsibility to know what these models are capable of, because these models are expensive from a resource perspective to run. Sustainability, right? I'm sure some of us are concerned about sustainability and how these massive models will operate in the enterprise. We want to make sure that when we're building a strategy that we leverage these models to their full extent, as opposed to building duplicated models to support them. So that's part of our job, to get educated on what can a model do and how can we leverage it to its fullest capability and not leave anything to waste. We also, of course, I mentioned this already, we believe in responsible AI. This is a lesson I learned the hard way, being on a project where we were just like, it's kind of what I see in generative AI right now in Chat GPT, right? Everyone's kind of like, wee, like they're like on this ride. But there's so many more things that we need to really think about when it comes down to building responsibly. And finally, as we move into the GPT specific portion of this session, meaning the tech talk, I want you to be encouraged that there's not a whole lot of expertise, deep expertise in this space. And more importantly, we just need a massive influx of people who care about this and want to build for these solutions with this technology. I have done everything in my life with this principle: learn by doing. Start building, put your fingers on a keyboard and just start building. So get into GitHub or InnerSource or Bitbucket or whatever you're in. Start building examples. There's lots of example codes out there. I'm actually recording 2 classes for generative AI next week that are all around solution playbooks that we can use in order to help you. Like, I'm going to give you a notebook and you could just run through the notebook. I always say it's like tracing paper, right? Find projects you can use. I don't know if you know artist tracing paper, but it's like this paper you can use that's kind of see-through, and you can put it on top of very complex work, like a deep learning model. And you can put it on top of complex work and trace over it to create some muscle memory. This is how I've learned some of the most complicated NLU projects I have been on, because I looked at working projects and I built them. Now, sometimes we don't have working projects and we have to build net new, but many times the net new is really a combination of lots of old stuff. And so learning by doing, implementing projects, just start building, is a key philosophy that I've used in order to build better solutions at scale. So this is good information for you. These are a study that was done of the Fortune 500 to be like, where do you see opportunity when it comes to AI and LLMs or large language models? Where do you see opportunity? And you can kind of course, this will resonate with some of you differently. You can see like customer intelligence, knowing more about our customer, being able to communicate better to our customer. Of course, the chatbot world is completely revolutionized, or maybe evolutionized. Anyway, retail intelligence, security, predictive maintenance, more resource optimization. How do we optimize the world that we're living in or with this new capability? One of the things I want to encourage you to think about a little bit differently is that a lot of people say, ChatGPT, for example, is their view of what's capable with these models. And I want to kind of mention that, of course, ChatGPT has kind of created this iPhone moment. Remember, well, some of us remember when the iPhone came out, it was like the first time we could take a computer literally and put it in our back pocket. ChatGPT, same thing. It gave us this ability to like take this AI model, put it in our back pocket. I literally have ChatGPT on my phone. So anytime I have a question that I'm like curious about, I'll just be like, hey, what do you think? I did the same thing with Alexa when it first came out, right? I would just ask Alexa questions that I would have looked up in the past. So same idea here, except now, I don't know, I'm not sure if you know a little bit about ChatGPT. Certainly others have probably talked about it and will, but it's based on, right, 499 million websites today across 175 billion parameters of data. We're now going to see trillions in the next version. So it's extremely knowledgeable, but it's like, what's that term? Jack of all trades, Jill of all trades, right? It's kind of moderately knowledgeable or even high level, 1,000-foot view knowledgeable about almost everything because of that sheer vast amount of knowledge it's ingested. However, if any of you know a little bit about websites, they're written by humans, you know, the humans that have bias, the humans that are wrong, right? And the model doesn't know this. So we really have to be careful about how we build these solutions at scale. This is just to give you an idea. This is one of the first times where a technology has started. We've got investment in large clients immediately. You know, it took me years to get companies to invest in certain AI solutions. Now we're seeing it in months, sometimes in weeks. As soon as we do an education session, they're like, great, how do we get started? And the whole sales team's like, well, I'm not sure because we weren't prepared. We thought you would say like, wait 2 months or a year, right? And they're like, literally give me the SOW for that work right now. So I think it's great, right? It's great to operate at this speed because we get to learn more, but we do have to be careful. We have to think about it. This is just an example of one of the ways that I present, you know, how does this thing work? Because ChatGPT became so popular, people often think about ChatGPT as the thing, right? They think about it as that's what I want. And what I try to encourage them to realize is that the GPT model is multimodal, right? It's not just for conversations. You can actually use signals as a service. So imagine if I could use signals from my customer, signals from my website data, signals from my service, like my ticketing system, all as information that can be used in a natural language request to generate, I don't know, Power BI dashboards, right? So the opportunity really is endless because it doesn't take a human to do the entry. I can actually formulate human questions automatically using RPA, right, from systems that my business already has. And I'll show you an example of that in a second. But here you can see some use cases. Smart Industrials, for example, is just one of the types of companies I work with. I love it because they don't get much love when it comes to tech. They've seen a little bit of love in the digital twin world. But I really, you know, our at least in the United States, there's a lot of kind of smart industrial work that needs to happen in order for us to really change the foundational infrastructure of our country. And so I like being involved in this. But you'll notice here, and this is the same slide I use, slightly different for every industry. But you'll notice first is the app. That's like the Chat GPT, the website, the bot. Then, though, it's built on top of, and this is something most people don't know, you can fine tune a model to know who you are, who your business is, what you care about, what you want it to be smart on. That, of course, sits on top of the actual model itself. We call these foundation models because you'll see they serve as the foundation to a custom model that delivers an application level service right to the world. And then, of course, that sits on hardware. Now, today, that hardware is not available widely, right? It takes a lot of resources to run these types of models that are trained on so much data. So there's, I don't know, a handful, maybe a dozen firms, or I should say maybe like labs in the world that can support this type of hardware. You could probably think of them, right? Like NVIDIA and of course, all the cloud providers, Intel, like there's people that do this work and it's an evolution of kind of their different chip processing work that they've done in the past. But there's also some startups in this place, in this space, an organization called Samba Nova. I don't know if you know them, Samba Nova Systems. You can go check them out. But they roll in hardware to your organization if you want your own private GPT. And maybe you do. Usually regulated industries like finance or healthcare, right? They're like, hey, I don't want to do public cloud stuff, right? I want it in my own data center. And so this gives us the ability to do that. This is probably the most important slide I will share with you. It is how we mitigate for all of the things. Oh yeah, it's Samba Nova. Maybe I could type it in really quick for you. Great question. Thank you. So look them up. Very cool. They were very popular in COVID because they were able to roll in hardware to some of the largest health organizations in the world and give them the power to process massive amounts of imagery, like lung imagery, right? When people were trying to process so much information and help out. So they were the hardware provider in many of those cases. Thank you. Awesome. I love it when the family chimes in and works together. So thank you for that. And there's other providers as well. This is just one that I happen to know and have learned about since COVID. And I like knowing people before they were cool, right? So OpenAI, similarly, I did some interviews with the CTO at OpenAI, but before they were cool and they stopped taking my calls, like I'm just kidding. They're friends with me now, but now they're very busy, obviously, because they've built one of these immense platforms. So let's take a look at this slide. I think it's really important to understand. Like generative AI is this little box in the middle, content generation. That's one piece, and it's an important piece, but it does need to sit in an enterprise ecosystem of capability that protects not only yourself as the developer, but also your users, your clients, your customers. So the first thing, of course, is something that most people don't think about, because this model, GPT stands for Generative Pre-trained Transformer. Transformer is the thing we love because it changed our world from a natural language perspective, right? It evolved all the work we used to have to do in mapping like intents and preserving context, like all of that got better when transformers were released. And just to give a shout out, transformers were released by Google. They open sourced it, which is amazing, because then a company like OpenAI could take their open source model and build, what they've built, which is pretty impressive. So I always like to give credit where credit is due. Now that we've got those models, though, it's important, even though it's generative and pre-trained on millions and millions of websites, we still need to make it smart about us, make it smart about our use case, about our companies, so that it's not wrong. Because oftentimes, if you scrape 499 million websites, chances are you're going to see embellishments where they don't belong. You're also going to see data that's actually wrong. And it's not going to even be trained. Maybe one of those 499 websites wasn't your company's website, which may be true, but oftentimes it's actually, you'd be surprised what it knows about your company right now. But this pre-training serves you to a point, but the deep expertise that makes these models effective for enterprise use cases is this fine-tuning. And that's an important step in the process. Of course, once we've done the right data collection, remember I mentioned our principle, we need to make it an inclusive data set, right? We need to make sure all of the personas that we can possibly think of are addressed in that data set. I'll give you a lesson learned from Amazon Alexa, right? Women would say to me when I got off stage, women would come up to me and they'd be like, why does Alexa listen to my husband more than it listens to me? I don't know if any of you heard this. Anyway, it might happen to you as well. Well, there's a reason, obviously. I won't point fingers, but like it's a data problem, right? Like it's not broken. It's just a data problem. And there's a longer story to that. I won't go into it, but let's make sure that the data represents who's going to use it, so that they don't walk out and go, yeah, that answer doesn't, I don't even understand what that means from my perspective. So this is why fine tuning is so important. It's how we tune the model to give answers that are appropriate for who we expect to be asking the question. There's also a new role that has been identified in this space called prompt engineer or prompt engineering. And that prompt engineering space is learning to ask the right question. But I think part of that is, how do we make sure, again, that even if we ask the right question, if the data isn't there, we'll find that this next piece becomes really critical. So content generation then happens. We know how that works. A prompt engineer types in stuff into a chat GPT or a GPT engine, pops out some generated content, maybe a summary of a call center call. And then you'll see here, the very next thing we have to do is make sure that that model isn't telling lies. I will tell you, fun fact, I add in now into my prompts where I want it to be very definitive in its answer based on data I trained it on. There's a couple hyper parameters on the model you can tune to control this, but you can also, in zero prompt learning, right? You could also just tell it, do not tell lies. Do not make up facts. I do this literally. I kind of giggle every time I tell my bot not to lie. It's like I'm talking to my children. But that's actually not a bad analogy, which is why I always say, like, AI is not wrong. My generative, system isn't wrong when it gives me inaccurate information. It's just untrained. And it's an important thing to remember, because we don't want to throw away effort we've built just because we're not willing to do the training. And you should know that it's our responsibility to do that training. If it listens to men better than it listens to women, what should we do? Oh, right, get more women to train it, right? And that's, of course, Amazon did that, right? But we need to create mechanisms for validating, is it doing the right thing for the right people at the right time? The next one, it has a heart in the middle, which is definitely related to how do we make sure we don't hurt people, right? How do we be more loving from an AI perspective? And the way we do that is by mitigating bias. So these models are trained on data you don't know. You don't know what the 499 websites, what's on those websites, right? Like, that's the whole point. I don't want to know. I want the goodness that comes out of it without knowing all the detail that went into it. Great. However, that means that these systems will now, over time, begin to amplify bias we had no part of, right? We did not ingest that data. We were just getting it as part of the model. So you need to create processes for managing and mitigating the risk of bias being amplified. Bias is there. There's nothing you could do about that. You can't get rid of it. It's there. But there are processes to mitigate the impact of that bias on your users and on the system. So you need to have that. You'll notice human in the loop kind of covering the whole bottom there. There has to be a human in the loop to monitor, manage, and control these processes and evolve them. Another thing that's really important is, and something that I've seen clients get stuck with, is assets. So let's say, here's one of my favorite use cases. Some of us spend a lot of time generating RFPs in the consultant space, right? We're building requests for proposals to do work. And you could say this is same as true for college term papers. Oh, I guess we're not using it in education, but you know what I'm saying? Like, there's a framework, a bunch of kind of scaffolding, even in code, that we do that's not really using my brain power or my creativity. It's just like the necessary setup to do the actual work. And so GPT is great for that solution. But what happens when I, let's say, ask a GPT model to start generating RFPs for me? And now I can engage my entire field, tens of thousands of people, to now also start generating RFPs. It's like do you remember the days of Groupon coupons, right? Where a small startup would be like, here's a free coupon, come in for a cupcake, and it would go viral and the business would shut down. Like, they wouldn't be able to handle their very best day. So same thing here. You will get sped up using a generative AI solution. However, it can immediately slow you down if you are not prepared at scale to manage what it's generating and moderate and mitigate risk in the content that it's generating. Most people don't think about this, right? They just never think at this scale of like, oh, right, what happens when the model's data, what the model starts to change? There's going to be an impact of your fine tuning on the base model. Understand what that is. Set performance metrics for that, right? We want to be very specific about what is a good model and what is a model that's not operating on the mark, so that we can, and that's why you'll see this is a continuous process. This is true with all AI. When it goes out into the wild, you're not like, okay, I use an analogy. It's like teaching a 7-year-old everything that they need to do in their entire life, every guardrail. And then at 7 being like, okay, go on into the world, enjoy your life, like, get a job, you guys start paying bills. It's not like reasonable, right? We just taught it what to do. There is a lifelong, right? We have our parents until maybe 18, maybe longer for some of us. And then we have, right, we get coaches, and we get, we have like a human in the loop process in our own lives. We kind of need to think and extend that same idea from a responsibility perspective to these models. Someone needs to constantly be monitoring them. At my time at Alexa, we had an accuracy review team that would always, we looked at dashboards all day long looking for blips in the ground truth. How is it shifting? How is it changing? How is the content being added to Alexa shifting its deep learning understanding? And it requires someone to look at it. AI, you could use a little bit of AI to monitor itself, but even saying that sounds a little like, well, let's make sure there's a human in there, making sure that the AI is not, there's lots of research out there about AI, checking AI, and especially in a deep learning model or a adversarial model, how that can sometimes work against us. If you've ever seen, what was that movie with Matthew Broderick back in the day? It was like War Games. Anyway, it's funny to see all this stuff become reality right now. So anyway, hopefully you got, hopefully that makes sense and is helpful to you in understanding that it's way more than just generative AI that we're thinking about here, right? It's way more than the Chat GPT box. It's how do we deliver that value in the context of safety, security, privacy, bias mitigation, right? It's our responsibility to deliver solutions that include all of these capabilities. Now we get to some of the good stuff in my world. Remember I talked about multimodal. So I gave you some principles. That was like your vegetables. Maybe I should have gave you dessert first, but I gave you the vegetables first of like, here's how we should do things, how we should think about it. This is a little bit more about how it ends up resonating or showing up in an enterprise workforce. One of them here is we have, a set of emails, voice transcripts, chat, right? A set of data that's coming into the system. And with GPT, the benefit now is that we have one model that can do a bunch of stuff, right? We have one model that can do semantic search, content generation, right? We have content summarization, one of the key features that I end up extracting from it right now, translation across multiple languages, named entity recognition, which I now also use for PII redaction, you name it, document classification, generation of code, all one model that does what we used to have to build lots of models for. And I used to build these models and then containerize them and then orchestrate them and then have an ML ops strategy around them, right? It was a lot of work. And so here you can see we simplify that, but now it's simpler from an architectural perspective, but it's just as hard because now there's a element of risk in each one of these functions, right? Like semantic search. If that doesn't go well, what's the risk of that? I call it design justice. There's this cool term, some of you may want to adopt it, called AI Jedis. Have you heard it? Like those that are concerned, like myself, about justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion, which I like, okay, cool. Anytime I can attribute myself to Jedi, like I'm all about it. But in this case, it's quite, it's a bit of a noble cause. Like it's not required. There is no government regulation around how you build this technology. There's not even, I mean, there's no real consequences other than your brand, which maybe is important, but other than your brand of infringing upon the rights or the, executing accidental injustice against demographics because you didn't think it through. Like there's no legal consequences to that today. There's no financial consequences really again, I mean, ask Google, right? Like they had a bit of a blip in their demonstration of capability and they saw their market value change. Like who knew you could do a demo of a brand new technology and see your market value go down? It's a new world. And so being much more diligent about this, I think it's really important. There's no legal ramifications. There will be soon, I hope. I'm part of several conversations about that, but there isn't right now. So now it's the volunteers, right? It's people like us who care about these problems, people who attend a session like this. Not everybody comes to this session because they're like, responsible, responsible. Like somebody else will worry about that. We become the champions. We become the ones who say, great, we have all of this. What is the risk of each? So I use a term called design justice. I make sure in the past, in my early days, I used to only think about the happy path, right? It's kind of the lost art of functional requirements, right? If you remember those days where we used to, I mean, some of us still do this, but we'd have these functional requirements and we would identify a happy path, like what happens when everything goes well, but we'd also think through what happens when failures will occur. We're not as deliberate about that with our AI solutions, right? And maybe because we don't exactly understand how those failures will happen until our customers use it. But I'm always hesitant. I always tell people, do not use a subreddit to find out what's wrong with your AI product. Like, don't wait till it's on like a subreddit and you're anonymously reading people's complaints about how your AI product is hurting them that leverages this technology. Like, do the work ahead of time. Find out what's the risk of semantic search being wrong. What's the risk of the content we're generating being wrong? Great. Oh, awesome, Amir. That's a great book. I totally agree. There's actually a new one coming out too. I didn't write it, but this is awesome. Great. Thank you for that. Content summarization, right? What happens if I'm summarizing a call between a live agent and a customer and I get the product name wrong, or I get, I attribute falsities to that because the data says people who have conversations like this often also have conversations like that include this. So I'll just add it in. These are the types of things that ChatGPT today is known to do. I recently did a search on one of my colleagues in this space, and when I did a search on him, it actually attributed a bunch of things to his resume that he never did. And I did some research on that, brought it up with the team at OpenAI. And it was interesting because it was making, because of how the model is trained, it was just making assumptions, right? It was like, well, people like this will also do things like that. And it was like, spoke at Stanford, no, wrote three scholarly articles, two were right, one was, falsely attributed. The challenge, though, is that it was stated as if it was all true. I could have accepted it as if it was all true, kind of like Wikipedia, right? We look at that, we're like, I presume this is right. Now, maybe some of us on the data side realize the potential nature of that, but our job is to evaluate that risk and mitigate that risk in our solution. So hopefully this is helpful. These are these are a short list of use cases that we have identified that you can go after relatively easily. Under GPT, these are all accessible with very little, like you don't really have to worry too much about legal backlash, indemnification, copyright infringement. Things get a little bit more, I don't ever say it's a no-go, but there a little bit more rigor and discipline is required in projects that are using Codex because it was trained on a bunch of GitHub repos, right? A bunch of code repositories. And after publishing, some of the owners of those repos are like, wait, I object. And so as a result, there's some litigation happening right now. That will all get resolved. Some of that indemnification is covered when you use products like Microsoft Azure OpenAI. I am an MVP for that, so I do tend to lean in that direction. But if you're worried about that, know that you're not indemnified using a research model. Like that's not part of the deal. That's why you want an enterprise level solution when you use this for your customers. DALL-E is the same way, right? Like there's this whole, it's a sad image of AI with a line through it. I was like, oh, that's harsh, man. Like, it's not AI. Like, come on, be nice about it. But I understand the intention, which is a bunch of generative AI went and grabbed open source libraries and just started using them as baselines for generating new art. And I remember working at the Metropolitan Museum of Art with a bunch of data scientists from MIT. And it was interesting because at first the artists were like, yeah, no, not interested at all. No new art generated from my art is going to be considered original. And so I get the problem, but that problem is still actively in like litigation. So using DALL-E that you didn't fully custom train on your own art, again, it's not a no, it's just be careful there, right? Be knowledgeable that it has, when you train a model on massive amounts of data that you don't own, you want to be careful about how do you get indemnified against ownership that may be challenged in the future. Again, this is just Noelle trying to like guard you from going down a path where you do something and get a lawsuit later and you're like, wait, what? Where did that even come from? I don't even know what that image is that you're referring to, because it's based on a model that you might be using. And this is why just thinking through this as an organization is our responsibility. I do like to, and of course, if there's any questions here, would love for you to just chime on in. And I think we still have like 10 minutes. Is that right? Or am I grossly over time?
We are actually over because
Yeah.
we wanted to have discussions soon. So
Yes.
yeah, if you could start up.
Of course. That's why I asked. Yeah, so this is meant to just give you a sense of some of the actual use cases where GPT is helpful. A customer call center, customer service, ticketing is a huge area of where I spend most of my time. But I wanted to give you a sense of what that looks like. So sorry for going over a little bit, but this is how I think about things. Like, use the open source world. It's how GPT was built. It's how a lot of the technologies we're using was built. So I hope you enjoyed it, but also have an open mind as you're using this technology. Who you are is very important to the product that you're building. You may not realize it, but you'll be the one to raise your hand about things that others won't even really understand or know about because of their life experience. So you're extremely important. And in this case right now, I want to just remind you that everybody, like, we're humans first. We are using machines in bigger and bigger ways, but at the end of the day, we're humans. And so always come to kind of these projects with an awareness of that. I call it being trauma informed, right? Like, be aware everyone's got stuff. Everyone is working really as hard as they can. And if they're not, like, just have some compassion as you move into this space that's rapidly evolving. and include people. So this is me. I would love for us to, yes, have conversations if there's anything I can do. Thank you so much. If there's anything that I could do to, provide more context, answer any questions. I run the generative AI North American practice at Accenture. I don't know if I ever said that, but I run the generative AI practice. I have a team of 20 AI, open AI experts that we recently acquired and trained. So we're doing this work now. And if that's valuable to you from a perspective, like, I'm happy to help and share it.